Hello, and a really warm welcome to this roundtable discussion supported by the EDGE Foundation. I am Debbie McVitie. I'm editor of Wonky, the sector's daily port of call for all your higher education news, policy and analysis. And I'm really excited today to be chairing this discussion, which is about higher education innovation. And is it particularly in the context of the global pandemic that we're all continue to live through despite everyone's best efforts. And particularly thinking about, you know, where innovation has come from, what that experience has been like during the pandemic, and where we go next. In a minute, I'm going to ask each of our roundtable participants to introduce themselves and say a little bit about the institution that they're from. I think what's so interesting is the diversity of different types of institution we've got with us today. So I think there can absolutely be no case that innovation only happens in one part of the sector and one type of institution. We've got loads of really great examples. I'm certainly hoping to learn a great deal. And the context is that the EDGE Foundation earlier in 2021 published some case study examples in a report called Rethinking Higher Education, Case Studies for the 21st Century. I think it's a known thing that what gets you one place won't necessarily get you to the next place. And in higher education, there's been quite a sort of long-standing question about where innovation happens, what the changing needs of students, the labour market, the country will be in the decades beyond. And of course, as people sort of try and innovate and try and think through what new ways of delivering education might look like for the 21st century, and then of course grappling with the enormous transformative power of having to deal with that in a global pandemic, that might change what sorts of innovation are required again. So we're going to try and kind of unpack some of that, think through what does innovation look like, what are those common themes, what has worked during the pandemic, what may need to change for the future, and we'll all have a really interesting conversation, I hope. So as promised, let me come to each of you in turn. If you could each say, just introduce yourself, your institution, and say something about what you think makes your the provision that you offer innovative and distinctive. And I will come in. I will go in the order that I can see you in my gallery. So that means, Robin, can I come to you first, please?
Absolutely. So Robin Skelton, I lead external affairs at the Dyson Institute of Engineering and Technology, and a key part of my job is ensuring compliance with the regulatory framework for higher education. So since 2017, the Dyson Institute's been supporting WMG, the University of Warwick, to deliver a degree apprenticeship in engineering to undergraduate engineers at Dyson. And last year, we became the first provider in the UK to be awarded new degree awarding powers. And so from September this year, we will be delivering and awarding that degree. In terms of what's unique about us, we are based on the Dyson Technology Campus in Malmesbury. Our students work 3 days per week in Dyson, where they're employed as undergraduate engineers working on live engineering projects. They spend 2 days in a mixture of lectures and self-taught study. They're paid a salary and they're not charged tuition fees. Everything takes place on the same site, making it a really holistic, integrated experience. Summers are spent working on projects designed to focus on and develop professional skills rather than being on holiday. And key to our offering is our focus on health and well-being.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Wendy, can I come to you?
Yes, certainly. I'm Wendy Ivins. I'm the Director of Collaborative Learning with Industry at the School of Computer Science and Informatics at Cardiff University. But part of my role involves being the academic lead of the National Software Academy. And we teach software engineering at Software Academy in the hope that we can make our students more employable. So our key ways of doing this was to work much closer with industry partners so that we're able to give our students projects throughout their degree course. So it's almost like they get their work experience embedded into the course itself. So they typically do about 6 to 7 weeks in terms of the learning that they need within the modules. And then their last sort of 4 weeks are spent doing projects with real clients. And it means as well that staff work very collaboratively as well, so that the projects span across the different modules that are being done, and the students are then assessed across these. So it's a very collaborative way of working in terms of from the staff, from the industry, from the students' point of view, and it certainly has helped to improve the students' employability skills. And also more recently, in the last 2 years, we've also introduced a degree apprenticeship. So instead of the students doing their projects while in the sort of classroom, and our classrooms have been set up to be like a work office, they're actually doing it in the workplace.
Super, thank you so much. Diana, can I come to you? Our international correspondent.
Hello, everyone. My name is Diana El-Azhar, and I'm representing Minerva Schools at KGI today. So Minerva is a university that started around almost a decade ago, and we've graduated 3 classes, both undergraduate and graduate. The idea behind Minerva is really to transform what a selective higher education university would look like. So what we do is we have changed what higher education institutions teach. So our curriculum is intentionally designed to impart what we call enduring skills. These are critical thinking, creative thinking, collaboration, communication, intentionally, so they are part of the curriculum. Second is our pedagogy is based on decades of the science of learning, so it's fully active learning. And third is where we teach, and that's both classes happen online. They're not lectures, they're classes which are seminar-based and fully interactive, but also the other component is that our students within 4 years live in 7 different cities in 7 different countries and have a lot of experiential learning, internships, and civic participation in those countries.
Yes, and when I read about your offer, I confess to being a little bit jealous of those students getting to travel the world while learning at the same time. I mean, what an experience that must be. And one of the themes, of course, that we've had so far in the conversation is setting things up from the scratch. And of course, when you do that, you have a lot of opportunity to innovate because you're essentially charting your own path. But Sam, at Salford, you've been involved in an enormous transformation process in a university that's delivering in one way to try and deliver in a completely different way. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. So yes, it's definitely a process of reshaping and re-engineering in response to the external environment, particularly given the pandemic and the way that is reshaping, if I can call it that. So in terms of University of Salford and its history, it's always been very closely linked with industry. And at the moment where we offer a broad range of programs. So I know apprenticeships have been talked about previously. We offer a range of apprenticeships. We offer foundation degrees, undergraduate, postgraduate, and research degrees as well. And that's sitting across, again, a broad metropolitan portfolio, arts, humanities, and sciences. And so I suppose key to that portfolio, and perhaps a bit about what makes it special, is the way that it knits together to recognise the changing industry landscape of today and the increasingly data-driven landscape we live in. And that's also where our research strengths play into the space and combine with the teaching. And fundamentally, I suppose it's about, again, and these have been mentioned before, but real-world, problem-based, outward-facing education towards employability. And to that end, as I've mentioned previously, industry collaboration, it's steeped in our history, but it's everything we do and the way we do everything, and work and delivery of that curriculum in partnership with industry, from the multinational to the SME. We've got a huge concentration of SMEs within our region, is absolutely part of our curriculum. And again, in that respect, we're not necessarily unique, but I think the interdisciplinarity and cross-disciplinary working which faces off into that swiftly changing business and industry landscape is quite special for a university in our nature and our size, and it's yielding positive results. Ultimately, it's about productivity, and we're about productivity, and that's very much a civic productivity with that landscape in mind, to help continue to develop our region and our communities and their strengths, and then continually to seek to look for better ways in which that research-informed teaching, learning and curriculum equips then our students and our graduates with a future-facing skill set which acknowledges the portfolio careers in the disrupted industry landscapes of the 21st century. It's a very interesting time, again, exacerbated by the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so many themes coming out that I'm going to want to pick up on, so brace yourselves. But Andrew, let me come to you. A 4-star hotel on the University of Essex campus. I mean, that sounds like a lovely environment when we're not in the middle of a pandemic.
It's lovely as long as you're not working in it, of course. A different sort of thing, and equally seems to be a range of themes here. And I was about to say we're unique, but I've just realised that we're mostly not unique amongst this particular group. Edge Hotel School is well, a department of the University of Essex now. And yes, as you say, we have a 4-star commercial hotel. This isn't a training hotel, it is actually a commercial hotel. And we don't tell anybody that actually this is an educational institution on the basis that we don't want our customers to know they're full rate paying customers. So our students are studying degrees in hotel management and events management, University of Essex degrees. The actual building is a 40-bedroom 4-star hotel, country house hotel, but it's set on the campus, right into a corner of the campus. So, as I say, we retain this slight distance from the main university, but our students are studying in the same way as any other university students will do. They go to lectures and seminars, but they also have a big hand in running the hotel. At earlier levels, they're in operational aspects, and then they go into supervisory, and then in the final year, they effectively manage the hotel. We also have kind of bucked the trend a little bit in that we have 2-year degrees, which means that, like others here, the students will be working over summer, over Christmas, because the hotel industry doesn't shut. And apart from when you get COVID, but nonetheless, you know, we should be open 365 days a year. So, yeah, our students are there mixing real world engagement, running a hotel with their educational program. And similar to other people here, I think our phrase is industry engaged education. At every level and every module, we expect to have industry engagement. And that's been really very useful in the last year or so when students haven't been able to be on campus, but I'm sure we'll touch on that later.
Absolutely, and thank you all for setting that out. And of course, do go and if you want the kind of more in depth about what each of these providers is doing and thinking about, do go and read that Edge Foundation report. Wealth of insight to be gained from doing that. But I mean, so before we get into the pandemic, can I just explore this kind of question of pedagogy a little bit more, because I think that consistency of I guess active learning, problem-based learning, and industry engaged learning, I think is reasonably consistent across the piece. And I'm curious, I think, how I think I can see on the face of it a strong appeal to students, but I'm quite interested in your experience about what it's been like transitioning students into that sort of different pedagogical environment, because of course you're asking students to learn in a rather different way than they might have done at the earlier in their educational experience. So I guess I'll direct questions to individuals, but as the conversation evolves, do kind of pop your hand up if you want to jump in, and I'll call on you. But Robin, can I ask you about that, and what's that kind of transition experience been for your students, and how have you kind of evolved to meet their needs in that way?
Yeah, I mean, so thinking about kind of normal times outside of the pandemic, I actually think transparency is absolutely key. And when we look at the Dyson Institute model, it's hard, it's challenging. I mean, compounded by the fact that actually we're in the middle of nowhere in the Cotswolds. So you're not just talking about a different approach to learning, with and the fact they're employees with expectations on them as employees in the Dyson company, as well as this different way of learning. But we also potentially have a very different environment in terms of where we're based from where they come from. And I think the best thing you can do is be absolutely transparent in your admissions process, have as many pre-joining events as possible, as many opportunities for questions as possible, get those individuals on campus. That's for sure been a challenge over the past year, so that they can really understand and what you're offering, and not make the choice to come to you if it's not right. And actually, in our case, I think the combination of that Dyson brand, which is undeniably very, very appealing, and the fact that they're not going to pay tuition fees, it makes us highly attractive. The hard thing is actually getting people to understand that for many people, it isn't the right choice. And it's so important that we give the people, the individuals who want to come to us, the ability to understand and set themselves up for success, if that makes some sense.
Absolutely. And I mean, Wendy, in the context of training people to be software engineers? I mean, are you recruiting students who already have that aspiration and are very kind of confident about what that looks like, or is there actually is it a bit of a do you need to kind of build things in to support students to learn in that different way?
It's certainly a mixture. So some of the students that join us have got computing A level and have had experience, but we've also got some students who learn computing from first principles already on the course. We're lucky in a way because we've still got a computer science degree that runs at our Cardiff campus. So if somebody wants to do a more traditional computer science course, that's available, but we've always sort of marketed the software engineering courses as an opportunity for people to work on real projects in teams and in an environment that's sort of more office based, so they've got that experience as they go through. So it tends to be the ones that do want that sort of the working with clients that join the course.
And Andrew, I saw that your hand was up. Did you want to come in here?
Yeah, no, so I was just going to agree with Robin. I think the transparency bit is absolutely crucial. And it's got to be spelt out very, very clearly when students and parents as well are considering these sorts of programs, so that you don't get this idea of being missold when you actually get there, or disappointment. And I think showing people around a location is really important, but I think you've also got to be a little bit careful, because we find that students get to see the things they want to see. So walking around a 4-star hotel, they like the idea of being there, but perhaps not working in it because it's very different back of house. And I think the mantra that we keep trying to say to students is, you're not only going to become a student, a higher education student in the Edge Hotel School and of the University of Essex, but you're also going to be a young professional. And the first day you arrive, you take on both of those roles right from the start, that you're not just going to be a typical student, you are going to have different expectations. And I think that's important to stress the professional nature of that aspect of their development.
I mean, and Diana, I mean, I've no doubt when students are signing up to the Minerva experience, they know fully that what that involves, because it's such a unique experience. But learning to learn online is something that we've all seen students struggle with over the course of the pandemic. And what is it that helps students to be able to engage in that kind of environment?
Right. So first, I will agree with what Robin said, how important the admission process is, and not just about being transparent, about selection. So when we select our students, we don't rely on exams, standardized tests, all the traditional things that other universities do, because these are not good proxies for ability, competence, hunger to learn, all of that. So we have our own set of admissions, which are in-depth interviews, challenges they have to solve. So it already selects people who are more apt to succeed in such an environment. And in terms of having transparency, yes, we talk to each family ahead of time. We invite them over for a week in February when they've been accepted, when they're still deciding whether to enroll, etc., or not. And back to your question on, how do they get to learn online? Obviously, there's a growing pains period at the beginning. Because they have to be much more independent than they were before. But I think a lot of the pains that maybe other institutions have had with online learning, it's because, I hate to say it, but probably because the quality is not great. And it's not because it's online. It was probably not great before when it was in person. So for us, they're very small classes. We have 20 students per class. It's a very engaging environment. You have to have your video on. You speak all the time. You can't really be at the back and do something else. So they're very, very engaged. And that is taxing because the concentration is enormous. I've taken a few classes and I was deadly tired at the beginning. But after a few months, they cannot even imagine a class which is not like that.
Yes, I see. And Sam, I mean, obviously Salford, you know, you sort of a mission for the kind of for your region, for the community, and sort of, I guess, strong widening participation shops as well. Is that something that you're kind of mindful of as you're thinking about introducing students to that different way of learning? I mean, you must take lots of students with BTECs, for example, and does that actually in some ways perhaps ease the transition?
Yeah, I think the you know, any transition from a prior educational experience into university, there's always a bump there. It's impossible to, so it's acknowledging the difficulties in that bump. And I think I suppose there's two things to respond to your question. I think the first thing is that we work quite hard, both in the pre-arrival stage and through that crucial first trimester. We have trimesters at Salford, to really make sure that we understand our students and who they are, because then we're not trying to transform them into a different kind of person. We're trying to make them more them. And so it's acknowledging the intelligences, the behaviors, the strengths of our particular cohort, and the places the diverse kind of places it comes from, in order that we can make them better them, rather than operate from a deficit model which says, come to us and we will make you like us, which is perhaps reductive in nature. So the first thing is there's a real acknowledgement prior to arrival and through that first trimester that actually they're coming into a new place, and they're coming into an environment they may be unfamiliar with, some anxiety there, absolutely, but that's normal, and we need to help scaffold them through that transition. I suppose part of what we do from the point of engagement onwards is begin to get them to look at the exit door in 1 year, 3 years, however many years it be. And that really comes back down to our curriculum design principles, which are in the case study you referenced earlier. There's a diagram explaining them. And one of them is about path to professional. So right from the get-go, we're saying, actually, this is what you're here to do. And we're going to help you here to do it by making you stronger, better, leaner, meaner, quicker, faster, ... And this is how we're going to do it. But it's about you actually begin to think of yourself as a professional from the get-go. Now, obviously, that's going to be shaped very different, for instance, in our nursing provision than it might be in our graphic design provision. But the path to professional is laid out using the student journey as the core all the way through the degree, so that actually they're beginning to consider, well, what might I use this for, and how do I consider myself as a professional? And then the final piece there is then the attendant skill set, and by skill set I mean soft skills, hard skills, behaviours, attitudes and aptitudes are then begin to help them in that first semester particularly. So we've got a learn to learn programme in effect, which helps them learn with that in mind, acknowledging where they've come from, and the job that they're here to do, which is fundamentally about employability in that disrupted landscape. So yes, we do take a huge amount of time, and there's always more we can do. That transition is a problem to be navigated, not solved. Yeah.
I'm a little scared of your graduates. they sound practically bionic. But I think it's really interesting that you say, you know, this is a space where students can be more themselves, and I think that's, you know, sort of is an essential aspect of the sort of innovative space, where it's we're not saying there's this one thing called higher education and you're either in or you're out. And I think so much of the national discourse, I think, sort of assumes that that's how it should be. And this is I guess a kind of a true form of widening participation, perhaps you might argue. And so so we've got these sort of active pedagogies, lots of employer engagement, lots of interaction between students, and then of course the pandemic hits, and all of this has got to be kind of put online in some way or another. So, you know, what I guess tactics did you adopt to try and kind of keep the spirit of that experience for your students as best as possible? And I think especially when that transition happened essentially overnight about 18 months ago. And Andrew, can I start with you as being, I guess, of everyone, the most kind of you know, hoteling and the hotel industry is so very in person. You know, how did that translate?
Yes, I suppose we had a double whammy. Not only was higher education shut down, but also hotels and hospitality was shut down. So there wasn't even the opportunity of looking at other options or other hotels or other types of work experience. The transition, I vaguely remember it as completely chaotic, very creative. Well, I did have hair at the time, but that's gone. We first of all I think we had a first short period where we actually had some students who we felt we had to deal with immediately. So we put together what we call virtual shifts. And these were effectively online activities that they could engage with, which mirrored their intended learning outcomes. To say they were successful, brilliant, would be an overstatement. I don't think they were. The transitionary method, but it got us through a couple of months, which gave us a breathing space to look fundamentally at what we were going to do with the students. And what we came up with was, yes, a different type of virtual shifts, looking at the intended learning outcomes, but also going back to our ethos of industry engaged education. Because we had really good connections with the industry, and we had a lot of goodwill there, we decided it was time to cash in and capitalize on a lot of people who are sitting at home with, dare I say it, limited amounts to do and a lot of goodwill. So we actually created workshops, whole courses really, which were run by people from industry, by various different brands and companies. So we had the Dorchester collection coming along, and they actually delivered part of their graduate training scheme to our final year students, which of course helps them immensely to increase their profile, but also gives our students that really, I suppose, granular feel of what's going on in industry. We were helped by other organizations, Leonardo Hotels and Juries Inn, who brought in their senior managers to run workshops. And so rather than just having, yes, the academic side and the lectures and seminars carried on regardless, but on the practical side, what we had was, as far as is possible, an immersion into industry and a real understanding of the traumas that were going on in the industry at the moment and what the managers were thinking about in the future. And we're also very lucky to have what we called community events, where we gathered a range of professionals from the events industry, so people from the O2 and Wembley and places like that, to have a panel. But we also had hotel managers, and we ran several of these where, yes, it was a bit like question time, where we were asking questions and they were coming out with answers, but then we encouraged the students to engage with those professionals. Is it preferable to actually being in the hotel? I suspect the students would say they'd still prefer to be in there because they tend to enjoy the actual personal experience. But as a supplement, I think it has been working reasonably well. And I hate to say it, I think this is something that we're going to have to keep on the back burner, certainly for the next few years, because the future is by no means certain.
Absolutely, and I mean, two things I really love about that. One is that sort of you know, what are the resources we've got, and how can we kind of do things with those resources, and that I think is kind of, you know, the soul of innovation, isn't it? It's to kind of make, you know, use what you've got as best you can and do something a bit different.
It's either a mark of superb and supreme leadership or sheer panic. I'd suggest it's the latter.
But you can always reverse engineer after the fact. And there was a second thing, but I've forgotten what it was. So I think we'll just draw a veil over that and move swiftly on. Diana, can I come to you? Because of course all your students signed up to learn online, and that's exactly. But part of that experience is supposed to be kind of moving around the world, living in community. You know, that sort of civic engagement. I mean, how did that change, or what to what extent were students able to engage with that during the pandemic?
Yeah, so maybe we were at the other extreme from Andrew, where in the sense that our learning was not disrupted by a day, because all of it was intentionally set up to be virtual. Classes were not disrupted. However, we had around 600 students, virtually none of them in their home city, and maybe over 90% of them not in their home countries. And a lockdown happened. And our challenge was helping and ensuring most of these students were able to go back home. And that was a logistical challenge. It was a lot of work. However, what we were lucky with is that we could keep all our residential halls, so no student was kicked out. They were encouraged to go home when and if they could. So from that perspective, there was more stability than I think for many, many other students around the world, that their academics were maintained, their housing was maintained, and they could go home and continue their studies if they wanted to. Obviously, there was an experiential part of the program. Luckily, our semester ends at the end of April. So when the lockdown happened, in most countries, we were really towards the end. And the uncertainty we had was over the summer, is that what were we going to do over the fall? And whether we're going to maintain our global rotations, etc., or not. And these decisions were, as you remember last year, the situation was changing every week. So at the end, what we decided to do for fall 2020, so from September to December last year, was enable only 2 locations, which were Berlin and London, which were doing at the beginning better than other countries. And we had our students there, those who wished to go, and those who didn't could stay remote. And a lot of and then in the next semester, so January to April of this year, Korea, Seoul was an option because that was a safe place to go. But there were obviously some challenges. In Seoul, they had to quarantine for 2 weeks in a semi-prison before they could go back kind of to the outer world. In terms of the experiences, they were, I would say, some were hybrid, some were online. We could bring employers to have sessions online. For example, as our students were in Taiwan at the end of 2020, the semester, they were supposed to have a meeting with the president, the Taiwanese president, in person, and that happened online. So they still had a lot of these experiences virtually, and we kind of gradually had some nature, environmental, I would say, experiences outside. So it was a hybrid, but I would say the biggest challenge for us was moving people to go home once the pandemic and lockdown hit last spring.
Yes, I can only imagine what a challenge that must have been to kind of worry about and to worry about everyone's sort of well-being and at the same time. And I think there's something quite interesting about the way the pandemic, because I think there's sort of 2 versions, and I think some people have experienced it differently. One is where people lost opportunities, or they didn't get things that they were expecting to get, and then there's a version that says, well, the thing that you got wasn't what you expected, but it may have equipped you with skills or allowed you to reframe your kind of understanding of the industry in a different way, and that can be differently useful. I'm not sure we can sort of say more or less, but that's a different experience, but it still means something. It's still important. Wendy, I mean, thinking about then that sort of relationship with employers particularly, I mean, I can sort of see how it's possible to transition software engineering into an online space. And one of the things your case study mentions is that a lot of your students were using things like online project management tools anyway. But in terms of those kind of really necessary kind of interactions with employers and building those networks and those sorts of relationships that students kind of really gain from, how did that translate into the online space for you?
The project side of it worked really well. I think in some ways it was easier for our clients because they had the time to join us online because of the pandemic. The industry was going this way anyway. A lot of the companies, software companies we were working with, had their people working at home as well. So we were all going through the same sort of problems, but it meant that there was a lot more flexibility as well in terms of the clients being able to meet up with the students. So that side of it worked nicely. It's just perhaps some of the other things that are nice to do. We managed to get quite a lot of companies coming in and giving talks that aligned with modules, but the sort of the coming in and doing networking sessions and sorting out placements and that sort of side of it, those things were a little bit more challenging. They still went ahead, but it was harder to get the students and the companies engaged in terms of meeting up, and I think because of the uncertainty as well, because we've been going through lockdown after lockdown, trying to take somebody on over for 3 months over the summer was a big commitment when it's still unclear exactly what's going on.
And Sam, I mean, employers that you work with must have been going through absolute trauma themselves, thinking about, would they still exist after the pandemic? How many staff did they have to put on furlough and all that kind of thing? I mean, how did you find that affected your ability to maintain those relationships and sort of keep their engagement with the educational side of what they were doing?
I think it would be remiss of me to say it wasn't disrupting and continues to be disrupting as everyone navigates the next normal or the new normal or whatever we might be calling it this week. But I think the relationships, particularly with course teams, in actually uncovering what might work. This is where our course teams have got absolute connections at the grassroots into industry, and obviously we continue to engage with the professional, regulatory, and statutory bodies to actually take a steer from them as well. So the answer I have is unfortunately messy, but actually the messiness is the characteristic of the answer, and the answer was many and varied conversations on an ongoing basis, using the contacts and the connections that we've got in order to arrive at a best working practice for the student. And all of that was focused on the learning outcomes. So how can we work with our employees to satisfy these learning outcomes in a different manner? So yes, it was disruptive and continues to be, but I think by it's the effort put into that continual dialogue and maintaining that dialogue, because just when you feel you should be retracting and just concentrating on what's on my desk today because of all these things piling on, that's the exact moment when you need to open the door and have a conversation. Because otherwise what will happen, it happens in a bubble, and then later down the line, bubbles always break in the interface. They're perfect in the bubble, but that it'll cause problems. So I think there was and continues to be significant effort in maintaining those relationships, both at program level with the industry contacts that an individual module leader might have, through to conversations with PSRBs, and it goes on. And I think we are perhaps in a different space now, as opposed to the early point of the pandemic, where some of the reactions that other people are recounting, I absolutely recognise that. Right, okay, it's today, is it? Okay, let's get on. Now we're in a more considered space, and I suppose what we're seeking to do now is almost not to reach a point of it's going to be like this, but to recognise that we've got an iterative development. So almost, whereas at the start we needed conclusions and we need them by 4 o'clock, thank you. Now we're actually a space where I'm resisting nailing things down definitively, because actually I sense that there's going to be an iterative conversation on how best to equip our students and what the relationship might mean, because everyone's figuring out that space. And in that respect, I think we all need to get, again, a little bit comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it's going to be uncomfortable for a while. And everyone wants fixedness, but I think that I would counsel against that. Sorry, I wandered off topic there a little bit.
No, I think that's really interesting kind of point to pull out, because of course when times are uncertain and the world keeps changing and no one really knows what's going to happen in the next year, never mind decade, the thing that you want to invest in is the quality of your relationships and and I guess your organizational innovation and collaboration capacity, so that you're prepared for the future, whatever that future may hold. And I think that's a really important lesson for the whole sector, not just the kind of the cutting edge bit of it. Robin, can I ask you about relationships with students, because obviously that's sort of trying to maintain that kind of sense of a community and engagement during the pandemic must have been a challenge. I mean, how did you handle that?
It was, and I've been reflecting on this, and I think something that I have reflected on is the importance of organizational culture and of values. I think has really been emphasized by the crisis. So in our case, I think we were really lucky that our culture was already set up to provide a clear North Star, if you like, in terms of guiding us through the pandemic. And what I mean is that we are absolutely crystal clear, we have been since our conception, that the health and well-being of our students has to be at the center of our decision making. And how that manifested in the pandemic was that the first thing we asked ourselves was, how are we going to know how every individual is doing and how we can support them? And how are we going to maintain a sense of community that we know is so important to supporting welfare? And so one of the first activities we undertook was mapping our communications platforms and mechanisms and working out how we needed to adjust them. So obviously we immediately pivoted to online student support provision. There was no delay, and we ensured that student support conversations were being proactively booked in. If we weren't hearing from individuals, we were checking in with them. That's, by the way, something we do normally do, but we've been doing it with particular rigor. We also enhanced that provision. So as an example, we implemented a framework called the 5 Ways to Wellbeing to encourage our undergraduates to take control of their own wellbeing. And we asked them and staff to share ideas of things that were working for them in video form. And that was a great community builder as well. We set up cohort channels on Microsoft Teams so that we could have more meaningful discursive chats with particular cohorts that were a bit more tailored. We also, in normal times, if you like, always have weekly meetings. They're called Friday morning meetings for all staff and students, and we spend half an hour together in person. We just moved that online. So we continued to have that once a week get together, and gave them a bit more of a wellbeing focus, introducing things like that 5 Ways to Wellbeing framework. I think another important thing is we didn't forget about our student rep structures just because we actually put a lot of effort into leveraging those structures and making sure they continue to function, because I think hopefully we can all agree that they are of unparalleled usefulness in working out what is actually going on with the student body and generating community activities and all of that kind of thing. And actually, just as an example, we held our mid-year meeting of student reps online, and we got pizza delivered to the houses to make it quite a community activity. And just a couple more examples. So at the height of the pandemic, we set up a weekly Slido. We gave every student the opportunity to ask any questions they had about the pandemic, about our response on a weekly basis, and we published the responses to those questions. And our director was sending out weekly emails reflecting on concerns, trying to reinforce that sense of community. Did we get everything right? No. Is our community as strong as it was? I don't think it is. And I think there's lots to address as we start to reopen. But overall, I think that general commitment to open communication and really having quite an unwavering focus on welfare did do a lot to support relationships with students. And it all flowed from the right cultural values being there in the first place.
It wouldn't be a rep meeting without pizza being delivered, whatever the whatever
it's an essential.
whatever the circumstances. Everyone knows that student voice flows from melted cheese. And I say that from deep experience. I mean, I'm really interested. One of the themes that I pick up looking across each of your different very different case studies is this theme of personalization, of kind of being responsive to the individual student, of trying to set that student on a trajectory that meets their aspirations. And I sort of understand how you can do that at a reasonably, I mean, on a comparatively small scale. I realize, Robin, having kind of like a very large community of students to work with probably doesn't feel like small scale, but if you think of how higher education has traditionally been delivered, it's it is to very large cohorts. And I'm curious about how you're thinking about that as we come out of the pandemic, and about how to kind of, I guess, remake those connections and reestablish that sort of sense of what that personalization experience for students looks like. And Wendy, can I ask you about that?
I think one of the biggest influences in terms of the student sort of culture and student experience was actually the team working for as in, it's probably what differentiates software engineering just from pure computer science in a lot of ways, that working in team. And seeing how the students would collaborate together, they would review each other's code and trying to improve it, and work in pairs when they had problems, and all those sorts of things not only sort of helped them build the community between themselves, but also helped for them to get to know each other and to improve the quality of what it is that we're doing. But what we also noticed was that when if the team was working well, the experience was fantastic. But online, if the teams weren't working very well and problems occurred, it would be a lot harder for the students to be dealing with it, because they wouldn't be meeting face to face to solve these things. And we occasionally had to intervene with some of the teams and try to help to resolve that. We probably did that a little bit more than we would have done under normal circumstances. So you have to put a little bit more effort in to support the students at the time when there are these sort of issues, because it is, they're so isolated anyway. You don't want them to feel that or feel that they're unsupported. in these very difficult circumstances that they're working in.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to sort of pause in case anybody wants to kind of add to that. I think that sort of covers the question. I mean, I think we're on the last leg of our conversation, and I think it's probably time to move on to lessons. And I think the way I quite like to do this, if that's okay with you, is ask a twofold question, which I'm happy to repeat if the kind of elements of it get lost in the conversation. One, I think, is about novel things that are absolutely going to be retained. The pandemic kind of caused creativity to happen kind of by default, really. And are there things that actually you think you will keep doing because they perhaps worked as well as they could in the circumstances, but may work even better in a different kind of post-pandemic? But also, did the pandemic teach you about something that you might have been doing that actually wasn't necessary, or are there things that you can actually stop doing based on lessons coming out of the pandemic, or that you'll do kind of really quite differently going forward? I think I'll sort of just round robin this one, but Diana, can I come to you first for that one?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, from our perspective, there were not many things that we had to change or pivot, but one that we did was our graduation ceremony, actually. And we had already a very unconventional graduation, which was not walk on stage, get your degree, hear a speech, and go sit down. It was a 3-4 day event where we invited as many guests from the professional, academic, political spheres to have debates with our students on consequential matters. And our graduation is called Consequent. So one of the things we had to do in 2020 is do this virtually, because for obvious reasons. And what we found out that we could engage people who might not have traveled to San Francisco, Nobel Prize winners, CEOs of big companies, etc. So, and this year we did it again, although there was a component of students in San Francisco who could get together for other events. But it made us wonder whether we should at least maintain part of that event virtually, because it actually allowed more what we used to call luminaries or guests to be part of that conversation. So it's probably a thing we're going to retain. And the next question was: Is
there anything you're going to stop doing? You sort of think, actually, we were doing that because we didn't need to, and we can absolutely stop doing that now.
Well, that's more on the staff side. It seems to me that no one's really going to the office anymore in San Francisco. Although they can once they're vaccinated. We're a very remote company. I'm in Switzerland. I have a colleague in Trinidad. I thought it was a joke, but no, he is in Trinidad. We're all over the place. But we did have this office in San Francisco where maybe 50% of the workforce was going there. And I think that's becoming less of a thing. We'll see.
Yes, yeah, you sort of hesitate to jump to fixed conclusions about that sort of thing, but yes. it does raise really interesting questions about how being a higher education professional might look in the future. Sam, can I come to you? Same question. What are you going to keep doing? But also, is there anything that you think we absolutely don't need to do that anymore, given our learnings from the pandemic?
Yeah. So hopefully succinct answer. I think one thing that the pandemic has taught us, and we kind of knew it before, and we were comfortably in that direction, but actually this has strengthened it and actually given us more, I suppose, more grist for the mill, is the way we engage and involve our students and our students' union in communications and problem identification, rather than consulting about how we would like to do the solution after the fact. Now, we were doing that already, but what became particularly around communication, I think our students have been in the room with some of our regional health bodies, with colleagues from the university, when we're all actually, particularly in the early stages, going, okay, so how are we going to do this? And actually, problem definition, having the students' union there, we've got an exceptional relationship with the students' union, and they, to put not too fine a point on it, they've played an absolute blinder and they have significantly not informed our decisions, they've co-created and co-produced our decisions. So that ethos of co-creation, co-production, but it not really being consultation with, it genuinely being, we don't even know what the problem is together yet. Let's co-define that, then let's work out a solution, then let's co-deliver it and work out which bits we can all play into. And I think it's strengthened the resolve to continue down that path. So that's one point, and I think we've played well in terms of the student voice and how we've engaged with the wider student body. In terms of what we stopped doing, again, in line with perhaps a previous example answer, I think conclusions have yet to be fully drawn, but broadly, I don't think we will go entirely back to the way things were. And I think we could draw that as a very broad conclusion. And as one specific example, I would say we are considering and thinking about the way we meet. And I mean that in all its ills. I've noticed the way my diary is significantly different. And there's bits of, if I put the time in the diary and all of a sudden it gets taken up, I think there's something else to consider as well around the way we have that cooler the water cooler conversation and what I would call the informal touch points, because it feels sometimes a bit strange to digitally doorstep someone, knowing that they're probably in a meeting, but but I've noticed my email go down as well, but other forms of communication rise in its place. So I think the way we meet and the way we interact in order to drive forward the functions and the priorities of the institution is under review. And I would be surprised if that went back entirely to the way it was. So I suppose my broad headline answer is we're going to stop doing some old habits, which are in a pre-pandemic world. But I don't have all the answers yet. I'm sorry, it's a messy answer again. That's where we are.
And some of it will, I suppose, evolve organically, and it's a question of how much how attentive it is possible to be to some of these questions. I mean, Andrew, you articulated something that your students really welcomed, which was the sort of the employer engagement and support, and that you're going to kind of keep some of that going. But is there anything you would like to particularly highlight as being something that you're going to keep on doing after the pandemic, or indeed something that you're no longer going to do?
I would agree with Sam. I think that originally we were a small independent higher education institution before we became part of the university, and I think that allowed us a lot more capability when the pandemic struck, because we were of a different mindset, and we found ourselves being sucked into the complacency and the regularity of a larger university bureaucracy. So we were in a good position when this started, because we still had those values and that expectation of we've got to fight for ourselves, we can't rely on other people, and we've got to be original. And I think that's helped us remarkably. And I think there are some things that we will keep. I think some online student activity is really useful because we're working in a different world. And I think the students need to have exposure to being able to communicate, even in the hospitality industry or the events industry, through this sort of medium. And therefore, to take that away would be effectively pulling us back a couple of steps, having hard won those benefits. I think what it's also done is it's reiterated the importance and the value of the work environment for our students. No longer do they just sort of think, oh, well, we're just going in to do a job and that's it. They now actively know why they're going in and actually are enjoying it tremendously because it was taken away. So I think that has had a positive effect. As I say, I think the thing that we're going to stop doing is bureaucracy. We had a clear the desks approach, which is anything that is not absolutely vital, dump it. This is not the time to be filling out forms because somebody needs to fill another form elsewhere which needs to be filed. And so in that regard, we've really trimmed down. So what we're not going to go back to, and what I'm going to fight tooth and nail against, is the same old paperwork and the same old comparatively pointless activities. And let's instead do things that are student-centered, student-focused, and that really do add value.
And of course, the corollary of reducing bureaucracy is increasing trust, isn't it? You know, essentially you're saying let's trust our people to know what they're doing and get on with it without needing lots of kind of evidence and form filling.
I'll come back to you on this one, which is that's the powers that be, and we've got a very good vice chancellor. Don't publish this, please, because their heads will get bigger and bigger. But you know, it has been a case that they've been forced to. They've been forced to say, look, as heads of department, you know your area better than others. And by and large, it's worked. You know, so rolling that back would be ludicrous.
Thank you, Robin. Can I come to you and just also with one eye on the time. So if Wendy, I'll come to you in a wee sec. I've got one more question to wrap us up after this. So if there's things you want to pull out that are different from what colleagues have said, you know, this is the opportunity.
I think in a way it's been a horrible but great learning opportunity for us this year, because we haven't been delivering that academic programme. Warwick's been doing that for us, and so we've been able to learn lots and lots of things that, you know, whether it's simulated labs or whatever it might be, that we will take forward. I think what I'd just dwell on is I think the pandemic really brought home to us that you can't deliver effectively if you don't also, you know, have an eye to your staff welfare, if you're not having the same welfare conversations with your staff that you would with those students. And I think that the pandemic drove that home for us. And we did things like making sure that team leaders were checking in daily with their reports just for 10 minutes, but having that really kind of regular connection point. And I think ensuring that there is empathy in relationships with staff, that we are having really meaningful, honest dialogue, to use the cliched phrase, but I really mean that, and I think that's something we will certainly carry forward.
And Wendy, what about you? Key things to take forward, key things to stop doing?
Key things definitely to take forward was the careful consideration of asynchronous and synchronous activities. You know, we had to really start to think about this, that when we had all the students together, we wanted to make things a lot more interactive. It was part of the community building as well. That we started to having to introduce sort of more videos or reading beforehand, and I think before now we've kind of sort of thought the students wouldn't do this in their own time, and perhaps underestimated the flexibility that it can bring. So it might made I think in the future we won't necessarily feel that we've got to fill in all of the time, but try to think very carefully about what's the best way to deliver this in a much more blended approach to allow a little bit more flexibility in the way that we move forward. And
I mean, in our final 3 minutes, I have one final question, and with apologies to Diana, this one's not really for you, because this is about you know, government and governance and policy making in the UK particularly. Is there I mean, we'll all have our opinions about, you know, how useful the government has been during the last 18 months in terms of supporting higher education and higher education students, and it's possibly not something that we would wish to dwell on. But is there something, you know, looking ahead to, you know, a comprehensive spending review, the implementation of the OGO report in some form of another, the narratives and kind of priorities that are coming out of government? Is there something that you would like to see that would help you kind of deliver on your mission as best as you possibly can, create that kind of positive environment for you to do that? Sam, I'm seeing a nod, so I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I think it's acknowledgement of regionality and the regional differences and the context that our students come from, sit within whilst they're with us, and go out into in the employment landscape, because we do see those significant disparities, and we do know that the impacts of those disparities then do have longitudinal effects. So I think some of the early experimental conversations in the HE bill around proceed and its absolutism in the way that it's measured, I think it would be very helpful to actually recognise regional strengths and differences in the way that the government deals with it, which will then also seem, in my somewhat naive head, seem to actually then play in a more nuanced manner into the levelling up agenda. Because then it recognises where and how it needs to play in a very nuanced manner. So that would be my request. Yes,
that whole data piece is really important, isn't it? Getting that kind of the judgments that we can make of the information that we have, and the context that is applied in each case.
Yes.
Robin, can I come to you for this one?
Yeah, I think I would really like degree apprenticeships to not always be an afterthought, not to be the complicated thing that we have to work out how to deal with. So just a daft example, but things like having to explain to our students that while they were welcome to come onto site in their employment and have labs in the workplace, we couldn't run academic labs. You know, even though it's all happening on the same place, very challenging conversations. And I think degree apprenticeships are such a huge opportunity, but the disparities in who governs them, who's involved with them, the different approaches of the kind of key stakeholders, it's really challenging, and there's an opportunity there we're just not maximising.
And Wendy, very quickly, of course, different context in Wales, big piece of legislation coming down the pipeline to change the way that the sector is regulated. Is there anything that you particularly would want to see from that as that conversation develops over the next year or so that would help you be successful?
I was actually going to agree with Robin. Our biggest issue is the degree apprenticeships. The Welsh context is very different. There's only 3 sectors so far that are allowed to offer degree apprentices. Luckily, software is for those areas. But we have no level 7. We're not allowed to do master's level 1s. And it's all a little bit... We only found out today, this week, about how many people we were allowed to sort of recruit for September. So everything's sort of a little bit ad hoc at the moment. And that could really tighten up, because I think there's some fantastic opportunities to work much more closely with employers and really improve the whole of the region through the apprenticeship opportunities.
And that's without going down the wormhole of things like reapplication to the register of apprenticeship training providers, which I could go on about for the next 3 hours.
That's a whole other roundtable. We're not going to talk about that here today, but we are. But from your lips to the ears of the various education ministers in the various areas. We've run out of time, so it only remains for me to say thank you so much for taking part. It's been really informative and instructive, and inspiring at times as well. Anyone who's listening to this recording, do go and familiarise yourself with the Edge Foundation's report, Rethinking Higher Education for the 21st Century. You'll find out more about all of the case studies that you've heard about today, and all the kind of interesting things that are going on. And if you are listening to, then thank you for joining us, and presumably do follow up with anything that you've heard today directly with the Edge Foundation. Thank you.